Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about all of the books that I read in April. I needed to get out all of my journals that I record all of my different book things in so I could talk about this. So the first thing I looked at was my book page where I just check off what type of books that I've read, and I read 13 books in the month of April. 5 of those were physical books, 4 ebooks, and I also finished 4 audiobooks. Out of my TBR list that I sent for April, I finished 4 of the 5 of those, and I did start the 5th one, I just didn't finish it. So without further ado, let's get started. I think I'm going to do my audiobooks and ebooks first, and then I will end with my stack of physical books. And this is going to be in no particular order. I'm just going off of my very prettily now starting to get filled in book tracker, and as you can see, the yellow is May, so I've already finished 1 book in May. Anyway, so let's start off with audiobooks. We'll go into ebooks, then physical books. So one of the audiobooks that I actually just finished in the month of April was The Night Circus. This was an audiobook that I had borrowed from my library. This is a book that has been on my TBR list for a while, I think since around 2019, 2020-ish, and my loan, I had finally put it on hold at the library on the Libby app, and then it finally became available, so I listened to it, and I definitely can see the voice of this author's writing style. Last year I had read The Starless Sea. I actually listened to it on audiobook, and I liked it so much that I purchased the book, and I definitely want to go back and reread it. But that is one of the best books that I read last year, and I really wanted to read her other work, so I listened to it on audio, and the writing style and the author's voice I still really loved. This plot was a lot easier to follow. It wasn't as cyclical as the Starless Sea, but I still really enjoyed this book. I also listened to The Christie Affair, which was another book off of my TBR list. This book was not as good as I hoped it to be. So it is based on the disappearance of Agatha Christie when she disappeared for, I think it was 11 days. And I thought it was going to be a little bit more like her story, but it was not. It was about a woman that her husband had an affair with, and it was from that person's perspective, and it just wasn't quite what I was hoping for it to be, and it just wasn't that good. I didn't really enjoy it that much, so I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm glad I finally ticked that off of my list. I also listened to Queen of Ruin, which is the second book or the sequel in the duology for Grace and Fury. So I finished out that duology, which is checking off of my finishing up series that I have started list. And I enjoyed this one. It definitely has some of the same issues that I found with the first one, it being a young adult book, but I did like the characters more. I found them a little bit less annoying in this second book than I did in the first one. And then the final audiobook that I finished in the month of April was Masquerade. This was a book that I listened to on my Spotify, with my Spotify hours on audio, and I picked this one up because I am a completionist and I wanted all the little bookmarks on Goodreads, and I needed one that I hadn't read yet from a Black author, and all of the ones that I like, physical books that I own, or I have borrowed before. I've actually already read by Black authors, and they weren't, or the other ones that I do have weren't on the list of books that I could pick from. So I just scrolled through and I read some synopses and found that this one stuck out to me, and it was available on my Spotify audio, and I really enjoyed this book. I never would have come across this book if it hadn't been for this Goodread challenge, which I am finding I'm really enjoying because it's pushing me outside my comfort zone and helping me discover authors and reading stories that I might not always come across. This was about a woman in what? I can't remember the name of the place, but she is essentially kidnapped and taken to be the king's wife. And it's kind of about her journey in discovering who she is as an individual and the power that she holds, and not the restrictions that society places on her in her country. And it was just like really fascinating to see this story. There were some parts that were like, yeah, I could kind of like see the plot coming. I knew what was going to happen next in the plot based on some things, and I also, and I know that this was part of like the purpose of this character and like her journey, but like some of the things that she continually does over and over again was kind of getting like annoying and repetitive, of like, why didn't you see that was a trick or a trap? So that was kind of frustrating some as a listening experience, but overall I really enjoyed this audiobook. So that was the 4 audiobooks. Now on to my 4 ebooks. I read One Dark Window, and I absolutely loved this book once I got into it, because I think I had started it, well, let me pick up my notes here. I had started it in February, but I had so much other reading I was doing that I didn't really like get into it and pick it up, and it was on my Kindle, and once I actually like picked it up and like got into it and made that book a priority, it was like really good, and I finished it really quickly. The ending of this book, I'm reading my notes right now, and I said the way this book ended was jaw-dropping in the best way. So I am just twiddling my fingers because I really want to read the next book, the sequel to this book, but I think my library hold for the ebook is like over a year, so I'm gonna check and see if my like local library has a physical copy that I could borrow, but as I start to wind down some of these books, I want to get into this, or want to borrow that one. Another one that I read was Twisted Love. This was one that I picked up and like moved up my TBR list. This book was on my TBR list, but I moved it like up in priority because we were talking about it at work at lunch one day, and I was like, okay, now I like actually have to read this. So it's on Kindle Unlimited, so I downloaded it quick and read it in like a couple of days. Yeah, it took me 2 days to read it according to my notes. And again, it was just like a good middle of the road palate cleanser romance. There was also like a little bit of mystery, but once like the first big twist happens, I kind of figure out what the rest of the book was going to be, like twists that were going to happen the rest of the book, but I wasn't expecting it to be like this literary masterpiece, so I'm good with what I got out of it. I got out of it what I was expecting, so now I have another series that I will hopefully be able to binge through pretty quickly. And then the next the next ebook that I read was another one for the Goodreads challenge bookmark things, and it was Atalanta. This is a Greek mythology retelling. and I am not familiar with the source material of this story, so everything going into it was pretty new, other than like what I know about the main like Greek gods players, based on like source materials and other retellings and stories like that. So it was fun. It was a pretty easy read, and I definitely would pick up another book by this author to read again. And then the last ebook that I read was actually a short story that I got as a free for a first reads, and it was The Sublet by Greer Hendricks. And this one was like a nice quick win for reading. It did take me like a couple of days to read. Like, I had picked it up when I didn't have a lot of books, and then, as you know, a lot of books either come available, or I wanted to start different books, or my Spotify audio hours renewed, and like all these different things. So I had started reading it when I didn't have a ton of books going, and then I put it down, and then I wanted to finish it off before the end of April. So on April 30th, I sat down and read the last 70% of the short story. I found that, like, plot-wise, I need more, but it was a nice quick win for being a short story, so I definitely will read more short stories in the future. Okay, that was all of my audiobooks, ebooks. Now on to the physical books, and I'm just going to go by the order that I have them in the stack in front of me. The first one that I have is The Unmaking of June Farrow. This was a book off of my March TBR that I started reading and continued into April and finished it off. This one I really enjoyed. It has been a while since I finished this. It was like a bit witchy, and I like this author's writing and writing style, so I definitely am going to probably go through her entire backlist and read all the stuff that she has written. The next book that I have is The Two Towers. This is part of my Lord of the Rings read through. I am doing a chapter a day read through for the entire Lord of the Rings series, so this is the second book, and then each month I start the new one. So now that it is May 2nd, I am on the second chapter of The Return of the King. I have it over there on my desk, so I was looking at the title of it, but I am on chapter 2 of that, and that has been working really well for me to get through these books. Otherwise, I think I would stall out a little bit, and I am enjoying reading the source material. I have to say, out of the first one, this one, and then what I've read so far, the third one, the first half of this book was my favorite, and was the one that I was like most into, and like actually wanted to keep reading and didn't want to put down. There were some days that I was like, oh, I should just read another chapter, but I stuck with my chapter a day, and I am enjoying how I am doing that. The next book that I have here is Sunrise on the Reaping, which is part of the Hunger Games world, and oh my goodness, I loved this book. I loved the Ballad Songbirds and Snakes, which is right behind me here, because this is my like young adult shelf there, dystopian and I have fantasy series. But anyway, back to this book. I loved this book. I loved getting the background of characters and understanding like why characters are the way they are, and because this is Haymitch's story, it's much closer to the original Hunger Games trilogy. There's a lot more overlap in characters and setting than there is in the world building piece of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. But then it's also that bridging connection of like you're understanding motivations of characters that happen in the Hunger Games trilogy because of connections from Ballad of Songbirds and Snake and Sunrise on the Reaping, and like where certain aspects of the major lore come from. So I really enjoyed this book, and it made me want to go back and reread, especially Catching Fire, which was my favorite book of the original trilogy. I remember waiting for that book to be published and come out. It came out, I believe, on like September 1st or 2nd of the year that it was published, because it was the beginning of the school year, and I made my mom keep taking me to the bookstore until our local bookstore had it so I could buy it. But that's neither here nor there. This was amazing, and I also am going to be borrowing this to my sister, which is why I needed to get this video filmed. The next book that I have is The Little Wartime Library. This is a book that was borrowed to me by my mom, I believe, in 2023. So I needed to prioritize getting this one read. I was really into historical fiction at the time. That used to be my main genre that I read, and I just haven't been reading as much of it lately. I think I got myself a little bit burnt out. I love historical fiction still, but I needed to take a break, and also my taste changed a little bit. I enjoyed this book. The story was good. I liked the concept of it. I just didn't really care about the characters and what happened to them. And like, it's a war story, so it's not a spoiler, but there's like characters or peripheral characters that you find out die or have died in the past when there's some like flashback moments, and I just didn't care about what happened to them. So again, I really enjoyed the concept of this book and the reading experience. It was pretty easy to read, but it just wasn't the book for me. And the last book that I read in the month of April and finished it up on April 30th, so not too long ago, was A Beautiful Mystery by Louise Penny. This is another book that was borrowed to me by my mom, and it is like a true like mystery book, a very traditional mystery book, I think is the word I'm looking for, which I have not read in a long time, so I enjoyed getting back into that type of reading experience. It did still like keep me guessing a bit of like who committed this murder and the motivations behind it. There's also a lot of like religious symbolism in this book. It does take place in a monastery. Is that what it's called? Yeah, a monastery. They're close. Yeah, monastery. In a remote place, so there's no one else around, and it gets into a lot of that questioning of where does, and they're monks, so where does the person end and the religious piece begin, and some of those types of conversations. This doesn't make me want to pick up another book by this author, but I definitely don't mind that I've read it, and I did really like a lot of the concepts and connections and like some of the like food for thought that was brought up in this book. So those are all of the 13 books that I read in the month of April. I feel like April ended up being a pretty successful reading month for me, and I'm excited to see what May brings. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.